Listen closely, because one of the most important things you can understand about avoidant behavior is this. When someone you care about begins pulling away, your natural reaction may be to move closer. You want answers. You want to explain what you meant, prove that your intentions are genuine, remind them of everything you've shared, and somehow convince them that the relationship deserves another chance. But chasing someone who is creating distance rarely produces the closeness you are hoping for. Instead, it can create a painful imbalance where one person is constantly reaching while the other keeps stepping back. And the longer that pattern continues, the more likely you are to lose pieces of yourself while trying to preserve the connection. Begging for affection does not create genuine love. It can create a situation where you slowly begin believing that you have to earn the right to be chosen. That belief is especially dangerous because it changes the way you see yourself. Instead of thinking, "We both deserve a healthy relationship," you start thinking, "What else can I do to make them stay?" Your attention becomes focused on proving yourself rather than evaluating whether the relationship is actually giving you what you need. Avoidant behavior is not always a sign that someone feels nothing. In many cases, distance can be connected to fear of vulnerability, emotional dependence, rejection, disappointment, or being fully known. For some people, intimacy can activate protective responses because closeness has become associated with emotional risk. That can create a confusing situation where the more emotionally important a relationship becomes, the stronger their instinct to create distance may become. This can explain certain behaviors, but it should never be used to excuse repeated hurt or disrespect. That distinction matters. Understanding someone is not the same as tolerating everything they do. If your first reaction to their withdrawal is to chase harder, pause for a moment. Ask yourself what is happening inside you. Are you reaching out because you genuinely have something important to communicate, or because their distance has triggered fear? Are you trying to repair a relationship that both people are actively working on, or are you carrying the entire emotional responsibility alone? The answer can reveal more than another message ever will. You should never reach a point where you have to convince another person that you deserve basic care. Because when you repeatedly beg for someone's attention, the deepest damage may not happen between you and them. It happens inside your own self-concept. You begin sending yourself the message that you are only valuable when someone else chooses you. Over time, that belief can make you tolerate uncertainty, inconsistency, and emotional neglect, simply because losing the relationship feels more frightening than losing yourself. But you were never meant to measure your worth through another person's availability. A relationship should add to your sense of connection, not become the foundation of your entire identity. No individual should become the sole source of your peace, confidence, or emotional stability. When you place someone above yourself to keep them from leaving, the relationship stops being a partnership and starts becoming a struggle for approval. Real connection requires mutual respect. It requires two people who are willing to participate, communicate, and take responsibility for their own emotional patterns. That is why sometimes the healthiest decision is to step back. Not to punish them, not to make them jealous, not to create a reaction, not to secretly test whether they will come looking for you. You step back because you finally decide that your own well-being matters too. Walking away from an unhealthy pattern is not necessarily rejecting someone. Sometimes it is returning to yourself. It is recognizing that you can care deeply about a person while refusing to keep participating in a dynamic that constantly leaves you anxious and uncertain. It is the quiet decision to say, "I would rather trust my own path than live in constant fear of losing someone." When you create distance from the cycle, something changes internally. You are no longer spending every hour trying to predict their next move. You are no longer searching for hidden meanings in every message or interpreting every silence as a sign. You begin getting your attention back. You begin thinking about your own goals, friendships, interests, and future again. And that is where your strength starts returning. The other person may notice the change. They may reflect on the relationship. They may recognize how much emotional effort you were providing. They may even decide they want to reconnect. But that is not the reason you step away. If you step away only because you hope they will miss you, you are still emotionally organized around their reaction. You are still waiting for their behavior to determine whether your decision was successful. The real purpose of creating space is different. You step back because you refuse to abandon yourself. If they eventually return, let their actions tell you what has changed. Do not build your future around promises alone. Look for consistency, communication, accountability, and a genuine willingness to participate in a healthier relationship. Someone's attachment style can explain why they struggle, but it cannot become an excuse for endless emotional inconsistency. And if they do not return, your decision still has value. You still reclaimed your peace. You still protected your boundaries. You still learned to stop measuring yourself through another person's choices. You still chose yourself. That is the deeper lesson. You cannot teach someone to value you through endless explanations. You cannot convince someone to become emotionally available by sacrificing more of yourself. And you cannot love another person so perfectly that you complete the healing they are responsible for doing themselves. Your boundaries communicate what your words sometimes cannot. They say, "I care about you, but I also care about how I am treated." They say, "I can understand your fears without allowing those fears to control my life." They say, "I am willing to meet you, but I will not chase you endlessly." That is not cruelty. That is emotional maturity. And there is another psychological reason why constant pursuit can make an avoidant dynamic even harder. For someone who already associates closeness with pressure or loss of independence, repeated messages, demands for reassurance, and constant attempts to repair the connection may feel overwhelming. What you experience as love and dedication may be interpreted by their protective system as increasing emotional pressure. The more intensely you move toward them, the stronger their instinct to create space may become. This does not mean your love caused their attachment pattern. It means your behavior can interact with an existing pattern in ways neither person intended. Their nervous system may interpret repeated pursuit as a signal that they are expected to provide emotional closeness before they feel capable of doing so. Instead of calming down, they may retreat further because distance temporarily reduces their emotional discomfort. That can look like shorter responses, longer gaps between conversations, sudden requests for space, emotional shutdown, or an abrupt change in warmth. And when you see that, your first instinct may be to do even more. You explain more, you send another message, you ask what happened, you promise to give them whatever they need. You try to prove that you are safe. But the cycle can continue. They retreat, you pursue. They feel pressured, you become more anxious. They create more distance. And eventually both people are reacting to the relationship rather than actually experiencing it. This is why stepping out of the cycle matters. You cannot control whether another person becomes emotionally available. You cannot force someone to confront their fears. You cannot make them ready for a relationship simply by being endlessly patient. What you can control is whether you continue abandoning your own needs in an attempt to keep the connection alive. Every unanswered message can slowly teach you to question yourself. Every delayed response can make you wonder whether you somehow became less important. Every failed attempt to reconnect can strengthen the belief that you need to work harder to deserve love. That belief must be challenged. You do not have to become more perfect to deserve consistency. You do not have to become less emotional to deserve respect. You do not have to become endlessly understanding to deserve communication. And you certainly do not have to prove your worth to someone who is unwilling or unable to meet you with mutual effort. Your value existed before this person entered your life. That is where the cycle begins to break. It begins to create a quiet belief beneath everything else. I have to work harder to deserve love. At first, that belief may be barely noticeable, but over time it starts influencing almost every decision you make. You think carefully about every message before sending it. You replay conversations, wondering whether you sounded too needy, too distant, too emotional, or somehow said the wrong thing. You become preoccupied with maintaining the connection, while your own emotional needs slowly move into the background. Instead of asking whether the relationship is healthy for you, you start asking what you can do differently to prevent the other person from leaving. That is where the pattern becomes damaging. You begin making yourself smaller to preserve the relationship. You tolerate things that once would have bothered you. You silence reasonable needs because expressing them feels risky. You convince yourself that patience means accepting almost anything. Little by little, your boundaries become negotiable, and your nervous system begins learning the wrong lesson, that love requires anxiety, self-denial, and constant effort. Avoidant relationships can easily become caught in a cycle where one person pursues while the other retreats. The more one person reaches for reassurance, the more the avoidant may feel pressured. The more the avoidant withdraws, the more anxious the other person becomes. Then the anxious person reaches even harder, hoping to restore the connection, while the avoidant creates even more distance. Both people become trapped inside a pattern that feels powerful, but provides very little security. That pattern should not be confused with compatibility. Two people can have intense chemistry and still struggle to create emotional safety together. Strong feelings do not automatically mean a relationship is healthy. Sometimes what feels like an irresistible connection is actually two nervous systems activating each other's deepest fears. One person becomes terrified of abandonment, while the other becomes terrified of emotional engulfment. The result is a relationship driven more by fear than by genuine stability. And chasing does not resolve that fear. In many cases, it simply allows the existing pattern to continue. One person keeps doing the emotional labor for both people, initiating conversations, repairing conflicts, providing reassurance, and trying to restore closeness every time distance appears. Meanwhile, the avoidant person never has to fully confront the consequences of their withdrawal or develop the skills required for healthier intimacy. Real growth requires personal responsibility. A person has to encounter their own emotions, recognize their patterns, and decide that they want to respond differently. Constant pursuit can unintentionally remove that opportunity. If someone always rushes in to repair the connection, the avoidant may never have to sit with the discomfort of their own behavior. The pursuer becomes exhausted, while the pattern remains unchanged. Eventually, the most important transformation is no longer about getting the other person to move closer. It becomes about finding your way back to yourself. Because something else happens when you spend too much time chasing someone's attention. Your emotional state becomes dependent on their behavior. When they respond warmly, you feel a wave of relief. When they become distant, your mood changes immediately. A message can make your entire day feel better, while silence can make everything feel uncertain. Before long, your sense of security becomes tied to whether another person is available. That is a dangerous place to live emotionally. You are no longer simply wanting connection. You are looking to another person to regulate feelings of rejection, uncertainty, and fear. The painful irony is that you may be searching for emotional safety from someone who has difficulty providing consistent emotional safety themselves. When you finally stop chasing, something inside you begins to settle. Your thoughts become less frantic. You have more room to think clearly. You start noticing how much energy was being consumed by monitoring another person's behavior. And slowly, your sense of dignity begins returning. You remember that love was never supposed to be a reward you receive after proving yourself enough times. Healthy connection involves mutual effort. It requires communication, consideration, consistency, and a willingness from both people to participate. One person should not have to carry the entire relationship, while the other decides when closeness is available. Taking a step back does not mean that you suddenly stop caring. It means you stop abandoning yourself in order to keep someone else close. And that distinction changes everything. When you stop pursuing, you are no longer constantly adding pressure to an already difficult dynamic. More importantly, you remove yourself from the role of constantly sacrificing your needs to preserve the relationship. You allow the other person to make their own choices. If they want connection, they have the opportunity to demonstrate that. If they want distance, you no longer have to exhaust yourself trying to overcome it. Their decision may still hurt, but it no longer determines your entire identity. You stop asking, "What can I do to make them choose me?" and begin asking, "What kind of relationship do I choose for myself?" That is a much healthier question. Your worth does not increase when someone finally recognizes it. Your worth does not decrease when someone fails to see it. Their attachment style does not determine your value. Their withdrawal does not prove that you are unlovable. And their return would not suddenly make you more worthy than you were before. This is why chasing an avoidant rarely creates the closeness you truly want. It can strengthen the very cycle you are trying to escape while leaving you emotionally depleted. You keep trying to convince someone else that you deserve love, while forgetting that you were never supposed to audition for it. Begging for attention usually does not begin with an obvious decision to beg. It often starts in much quieter ways. You call it patience. You call it understanding. You tell yourself that you are giving them another chance because you know they struggle with intimacy. You explain away another disappointment because you believe there must be something happening beneath the surface. Then you think, maybe one more conversation will finally make them understand. Maybe one more explanation will show them how much you care. Maybe if you become even more patient, more understanding, or more loving, they will finally give you the consistency you've been waiting for. But underneath those thoughts, something dangerous can begin developing. You start negotiating for basic emotional needs. Instead of experiencing connection as something mutual, you begin treating it as something you have to convince another person to provide. You ask repeatedly for attention, reassurance, communication, or consistency, and each request becomes another reminder that the relationship is not naturally meeting those needs. Your nervous system gradually starts associating love with tension, constant effort, and giving more of yourself than you receive. Eventually, you stop asking whether the relationship is actually good for you and become consumed by a different question. What more can I do to keep this person from leaving? That is where self-abandonment quietly begins. Preventing their departure becomes more important than protecting your own emotional health. Your needs start feeling like burdens you have to apologize for instead of natural parts of who you are. Little by little, you lose touch with the person you were before you became so focused on proving that you deserved to be chosen. In avoidant relationship dynamics, pleading often produces the exact opposite of what you hope to achieve. Someone with strong avoidant tendencies may be highly sensitive to emotional pressure, expectations, or the feeling that another person's emotional stability depends on them. When they sense desperation for reassurance, their instinct may be to create even more distance. Your vulnerability is still worthy of compassion, but intense emotional demands can feel overwhelming to someone who has difficulty managing intimacy. That does not automatically mean they feel nothing. Sometimes it means they lack the emotional skills, readiness, or capacity required to hold deeper connection in a healthy way. The harder you try to pull them toward you through pleading, the more strongly they may feel the need to step back. There is also a deeper psychological message hidden inside begging for someone's approval. Each time you depend on another person's response to determine whether you are valuable, you reinforce the belief that something is missing within you. The unspoken thought becomes, I am not enough unless this person chooses me. And even when attention finally arrives, it may not create lasting security because the deeper need has never been addressed. What you are really seeking is not merely a text, a phone call, reassurance, or a temporary display of affection. You want to feel genuinely valued, wanted, respected, and chosen. That sense of security cannot be built through begging. Real emotional safety comes when someone freely chooses to show up, consistently and willingly, without needing to be pressured into it. Love that must constantly be requested cannot provide the stable foundation your heart is looking for. Begging can also disrupt the natural balance required for a healthy connection. When you are constantly available, endlessly adjusting yourself, and permanently waiting for the other person's attention, the relationship can stop feeling like two people freely choosing one another. Instead, it begins to resemble one person desperately trying to hold together something the other person is allowing to drift away. Even when the other person remains physically present, emotional closeness can weaken because fear has replaced mutuality. The foundation becomes the fear of losing the relationship rather than the freedom to build one together. The difficult truth is that deep love and strong self-respect must exist together. You can care about someone enormously and still tolerate being undervalued if your boundaries disappear every time you become afraid they might leave. Choosing not to beg does not mean becoming cold, arrogant, or emotionally unavailable. It means developing enough maturity to understand that your needs are legitimate. They simply deserve to be met by someone who is both willing and capable of meeting them. When you stop pleading for the bare minimum, you begin restoring your dignity. You remind yourself that connection can be beautiful, but sacrificing your identity to preserve a connection is not. From that position, the entire dynamic can change. If the other person chooses to grow, communicate, and meet you with genuine effort, the relationship has room to become healthier. If they choose to leave, you are still standing because you did not destroy yourself trying to make someone stay. You are no longer making yourself smaller in exchange for affection. You are rebuilding your relationship with yourself. And healthy love has a much better chance of finding you when you are no longer abandoning yourself in the attempt to receive it. You begin to see that love cannot be manufactured through effort. You cannot give more and more of yourself until another person suddenly becomes emotionally available. A healthy connection develops because both people willingly participate in it. If only one person is carrying the emotional weight, eventually that person becomes exhausted. Detachment helps you see the relationship more clearly because you stop supplying all the energy required to keep it moving. When you stop overextending yourself, you discover what actually remains. And if the entire connection collapses the moment you stop holding everything together, that tells you something important about how balanced the relationship truly was. There is also a deeper lesson within detachment that goes beyond romantic relationships. It teaches you to trust life without becoming imprisoned by one specific outcome. You begin saying to yourself, I can release what no longer aligns with me, while trusting that what belongs in my life will find its proper place. That is not surrendering your future or becoming indifferent. It simply means releasing your obsession with controlling something that was never completely within your control. You can still care, you can still hope, but you no longer allow hope to become a reason to ignore reality. Instead of constantly arguing with what someone is showing you, you begin accepting the information in front of you. That acceptance brings relief, because you no longer spend every day trying to negotiate with circumstances that repeatedly damage your emotional well-being. You also begin realizing that love should never demand that you abandon your identity. You should not have to silence your needs, ignore your feelings, or compromise your emotional health simply to keep another person close. Detachment protects you from slowly changing your definition of healthy love just because someone cannot give you what you need. Without realizing it, you might begin treating inconsistency as normal. You might excuse prolonged distance because you are afraid that asking for more will push them away. You might lower your standards until almost anything feels better than losing the connection. Detachment interrupts that downward spiral. It allows you to understand someone's struggles without making those struggles your responsibility. You can recognize another person's wounds without volunteering to carry them.